The sound of my own heartbeat was so loud that night, I was certain it would give me away. There I was, lying in my guest bedroom at my son's house, eyes barely cracked open, watching through the darkness as my daughter-in-law, Rebecca, crept toward my bedside table with something clutched in her trembling hand. At 68 years old, I thought I'd seen enough of life's cruelties to recognize them when they came knocking. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared me for what I was about to discover about the woman my beloved son had married. My name is Margaret, and for the past 3 months, I'd been living with my son Thomas and his wife, Rebecca, while I recovered from hip surgery. What should have been a time of healing and family bonding had slowly transformed into something that made my skin crawl every single night. The strange drowsiness after my evening tea. The way Rebecca's eyes would light up whenever I mentioned feeling unusually tired. The mornings when I'd wake up with no memory of the night before, finding my personal belongings slightly out of place. But that Tuesday night in October changed everything. That was the night I decided to find out exactly what Rebecca was putting in my chamomile tea. Let me take you back to the beginning, to 3 months earlier when I first moved into their pristine colonial house on Elm Street. I was so grateful to have somewhere to recover, somewhere surrounded by family love and care. Thomas had insisted I stay with them rather than going to one of those rehabilitation facilities. He'd said Rebecca was excited to help take care of me, that she'd always wanted to have a closer relationship with her mother-in-law. How naive I was to believe that. The first few weeks were wonderful. Rebecca would bring me breakfast in bed, help me with my physical therapy exercises, and sit with me in the evenings watching our favorite television programs. She seemed genuinely concerned about my recovery, always asking how I was feeling, if I needed anything for pain, if I was sleeping well enough. It was Rebecca who suggested the evening tea ritual. She said chamomile would help me sleep better and heal faster. Every night at 9 o'clock sharp, she would appear at my bedroom door with a steaming mug, always in the same pale blue cup with tiny roses painted around the rim. She would sit with me while I drank it, chatting about her day at the marketing firm where she worked, asking about my physical therapy progress, seeming like the perfect daughter-in-law. But something started feeling wrong around the 3rd week. The tea had always tasted slightly bitter, which I attributed to the chamomile itself. But gradually, that bitterness became more pronounced, almost medicinal, and the drowsiness that followed wasn't the gentle sleepiness I'd experienced with chamomile before. This was different. This was like falling into a black hole where nothing existed until my alarm clock dragged me back to consciousness 8 hours later. I began waking up feeling groggy and disoriented, like I was climbing out of quicksand every morning. My mouth would be dry, my head foggy, and sometimes I'd find myself still in the same exact position I'd fallen asleep in, as if I hadn't moved a single muscle all night long. Then there were the little things that started bothering me. My jewelry box would be positioned differently on my dresser. My purse would be unzipped when I was certain I'd closed it. The drawer where I kept my important documents would be slightly ajar. When I mentioned these concerns to Rebecca, she would give me this patient smile and suggest that recovery was affecting my memory, that it was completely normal to feel confused after major surgery. But I wasn't confused. I was being watched, studied, and manipulated. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon in early October. Thomas had gone to play golf with his college friends, leaving Rebecca and me alone in the house. I was sitting in the living room reading when I heard Rebecca on the phone in the kitchen. She was speaking quietly, but something in her tone made me strain to listen. I couldn't make out most of the conversation, but I caught fragments that made my blood run cold. She mentioned something about timelines and assets. She said something about making sure I remained compliant. And then, clear as day, I heard her say, "The old woman won't be a problem much longer." The old woman. That's how she referred to me when she thought I couldn't hear. I sat frozen in that living room chair, my book forgotten in my lap as the full weight of my situation began to settle over me. Rebecca wasn't taking care of me out of love or family obligation. She was up to something that involved keeping me sedated and helpless every single night. That evening, when Rebecca appeared with my usual cup of tea, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of drinking it like I had every night for months, I was going to pretend to drink it and see what happened when Rebecca thought I was unconscious. I had to know what she was doing to me while I slept. Getting through that performance was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Rebecca sat beside my bed as usual, chatting about her day, while I pretended to sip the bitter liquid. Every fake swallow made my stomach turn, knowing that whatever was in that cup was designed to render me completely helpless. But I forced myself to act normal, to respond to her conversation, to gradually let my eyelids grow heavy as if the drug was taking effect. When I finally set the empty cup on my nightstand and told Rebecca I was feeling sleepy, she smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. It wasn't the warm, caring smile of a daughter-in-law concerned about her mother-in-law's rest. It was something else entirely, something satisfied and calculating. "Sweet dreams, Margaret," she said softly, turning off my bedside lamp. "Sleep well." I waited in the darkness for what felt like hours, controlling my breathing, keeping my body perfectly still, listening to every sound in the house. Around 11:30, I heard Thomas come home from his golf outing. I heard him and Rebecca talking quietly downstairs, their voices too muffled for me to understand the words. Then I heard Thomas go upstairs to their bedroom while Rebecca remained on the first floor. That's when things got interesting. Around midnight, I heard Rebecca's footsteps on the stairs, but instead of going to her bedroom, they stopped outside my door. I could sense her standing there listening, probably watching to see if I was truly unconscious. After what felt like an eternity, I heard my door creak open just a few inches. "Margaret," Rebecca whispered. "Margaret, are you awake?" I kept my breathing slow and steady, my body completely limp. She said my name again, slightly louder this time. When I didn't respond, I heard her footsteps enter my room. What happened next confirmed my worst fears and opened up a whole new level of terror I hadn't even imagined. Rebecca approached my bed and actually lifted my eyelid to check if I was unconscious. The violation of it, the clinical way she examined me like I was some kind of specimen, made me want to scream. But I forced myself to remain completely still, to let my eyes stay unfocused and glassy. Satisfied that whatever drug she'd been giving me had done its job, Rebecca began her real work. First, she went to my purse on the dresser. I watched through barely open eyes as she carefully went through every item, photographing my driver's license, my credit cards, my insurance information with her phone. She wrote down numbers in a small notebook, taking her time to copy everything accurately. But that was just the beginning. Next, Rebecca opened the drawer where I kept my important documents: birth certificate, social security card, bank statements, investment portfolios, and the deed to my house back in Michigan. She photographed everything, sometimes taking multiple shots to make sure she captured all the details clearly. Then she did something that made my heart nearly stop beating. Rebecca pulled out what looked like a small tape recorder and placed it on my nightstand. She pressed record and began speaking in a voice that sounded exactly like mine. "This is Margaret Elizabeth Coleman," she said in my voice, and the mimicry was so perfect it was terrifying. "I am of sound mind and body, and I want to make some changes to my financial arrangements." She continued for several minutes, creating what sounded like an audio recording of me authorizing various financial transactions, bank transfers, investment changes, even what sounded like updates to my will. Her impersonation of my voice was flawless, down to the slight tremor I developed since my surgery and the way I pronounced certain words. When she finished with the recording, Rebecca carefully replaced everything exactly where she'd found it. Then she stood over my bed for a long moment, studying my supposedly unconscious form with those cold, calculating eyes. "Soon, Margaret," she whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear her. "Very soon. You won't have to worry about any of this anymore." The way she said it, the tone of finality in her voice, sent ice water through my veins. Rebecca wasn't just stealing my identity and my assets. She was planning something much worse, something permanent. After Rebecca left my room that night, I lay there trembling for hours, my mind racing with the horrifying implications of what I'd witnessed. The woman my son had married wasn't just a thief. She was a professional predator who had been systematically preparing to erase me from existence while wearing the mask of a loving caretaker. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow in my room seemed threatening. Every creak of the old house made me wonder if Rebecca was returning to finish whatever sinister plan she'd been executing. But as the first rays of dawn crept through my bedroom curtains, something unexpected began to replace my terror. Anger. Pure burning anger at being treated like a helpless victim. I may have been 68 years old with a replaced hip, but I wasn't some fragile flower waiting to be plucked. I'd survived raising 3 children as a single mother after my husband died in a car accident when Thomas was only 12. I'd built my own successful accounting practice from nothing, handled my own investments, and managed my own affairs for decades. Rebecca had gravely underestimated exactly who she was dealing with. The next morning, I forced myself to act completely normal. When Rebecca brought me breakfast, I thanked her sweetly and complimented her scrambled eggs. When she asked how I'd slept, I told her I'd had the most wonderful, restful night in weeks. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me. But behind my pleasant grandmother facade, I was already formulating a plan. My first priority was gathering evidence. If Rebecca thought she was the only one who could play games with recordings and documentation, she was about to learn otherwise. That afternoon, while she was at work and Thomas was at his office, I managed to get myself downstairs to the computer in their home office. Moving around wasn't easy with my recovery restrictions, but determination is a powerful motivator. I spent 3 hours researching everything I could find about Rebecca Patterson before she became Rebecca Coleman. What I discovered made my blood run cold all over again. Rebecca didn't just work at a marketing firm. She worked at a very specific type of marketing company that specialized in something called estate transition services. Their client base consisted primarily of assisted living facilities, hospice care providers, and probate attorneys. On the surface, it seemed legitimate enough, but when I dug deeper into the company's history, I found a disturbing pattern. Over the past 5 years, at least 7 elderly clients who had worked with Rebecca's firm had died under mysterious circumstances, all within months of signing over significant assets to various family members or caregivers. The local newspaper had even run a small article questioning the coincidences, but nothing had ever been officially investigated. My hands were shaking as I printed out everything I could find and hid the papers in my suitcase. Rebecca wasn't just planning to steal from me, she was planning to kill me, just like she'd apparently done to others. But unlike her previous victims, I knew what was coming. That evening, when Rebecca appeared with my tea, I was ready for her. I'd spent the entire afternoon practicing my performance, making sure I could fake drinking that poison liquid without actually consuming enough to knock me unconscious. "You look tired tonight, Margaret," Rebecca said, settling into the chair beside my bed with what I now recognized as fake concern. "Added a little extra honey to help you sleep better." Extra honey? More likely extra medication to make sure I stayed unconscious longer for whatever she had planned. "You're so thoughtful, dear," I replied, lifting the cup to my lips and pretending to take a large sip. The bitter taste was even stronger tonight, confirming my suspicions about the increased dosage. As I went through my practiced routine of gradually appearing drowsy, Rebecca watched me with those calculating eyes. She made small talk about her day, mentioned that Thomas would be working late at the office again, and commented on how peaceful I looked when I was sleeping. "Thomas is so lucky to have you taking such good care of me," I murmured, letting my words slur slightly, as if the drugs were taking effect. "Oh, Margaret," Rebecca said, and for just a moment, her mask slipped completely. "Thomas has no idea how lucky he is." The coldness in her voice sent chills down my spine. But I forced myself to continue the performance. Within 20 minutes, I was lying perfectly still with my breathing deep and regular, appearing to be in the same drugged stupor she'd been inducing for months. Rebecca waited longer this time before entering my room. When she finally appeared around 1 o'clock in the morning, she was carrying something I hadn't seen before. A small black bag, like a doctor's medical kit. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched her set the bag on my dresser and open it carefully. Inside were medical supplies, syringes, small glass vials filled with clear liquid, surgical gloves, and what looked like official medical forms. Rebecca pulled on the gloves with practiced efficiency and filled one of the syringes from a vial. Even in the dim light filtering through my curtains, I could see her hands were completely steady. This wasn't her first time doing whatever she was about to do. She approached my bed with the syringe, and every muscle in my body tensed. This was it. This was the moment Rebecca planned to end my life and make it look like a natural death during my recovery. But as she leaned over me, preparing to inject whatever poison was in that syringe, I decided I'd seen enough. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," I said clearly, opening my eyes and looking directly into her shocked face. Rebecca jerked backward, nearly dropping the syringe. For a moment, pure panic flashed across her features before she tried to recover her composure. "Margaret, you startled me. I was just checking your pulse. You seem to be having trouble breathing with a syringe full of what I'm assuming is a lethal injection. That's quite an unusual way to check someone's pulse, don't you think?" The pretense dropped from Rebecca's face like a discarded mask. What remained was something cold and predatory, completely devoid of any human warmth. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice now carrying a slight accent I'd never heard before. "Long enough to document everything you've been doing to me. Long enough to research your previous victims. Long enough to contact the authorities." Rebecca's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You're bluffing. You've been unconscious every night for months. You couldn't have documented anything." "Try me," I said, reaching slowly for the drawer of my nightstand. "Would you like to see the photographs I took of you going through my belongings? Or perhaps you'd prefer to hear the recording I made of you practicing my voice." The color drained from Rebecca's face as she realized I'd been conscious during her midnight activities. But instead of backing down, she gripped the syringe tighter. "It doesn't matter what you think, you know," she said, moving closer to my bed. "You're a confused old woman recovering from surgery. No one will believe you over me." "Thomas certainly won't." "Thomas might not believe me," I agreed calmly. But Detective Morrison at the police department was very interested in what I had to tell him this afternoon. That was a lie. But Rebecca didn't know that. I watched her face carefully, looking for any sign of weakness or uncertainty I could exploit. "You called the police?" Rebecca's voice cracked slightly. "I called Detective Morrison and told him I had information about the suspicious deaths connected to your marketing firm. I told him about the estate transition services you provide and the remarkable coincidence that so many of your elderly clients seem to die shortly after working with you." Rebecca took another step closer, and I could see her mind racing, calculating her options. The syringe in her hand caught the moonlight streaming through my window. "You have no proof of anything," she said. But her voice lacked conviction. "Now I have 3 months' worth of evidence. Rebecca, should I call you by your real name? Because I know Rebecca Patterson isn't who you really are, just like I know that marketing firm is a front for something much more sinister." The truth was, I hadn't called any detective yet, but my years of experience reading people in my accounting practice told me that Rebecca was beginning to crack under pressure. She'd built her entire scheme around the assumption that her victims would remain helpless and unaware until it was too late. "What do you want?" Rebecca finally asked, and I could hear desperation creeping into her voice. "I want you to put down that syringe and tell me exactly what you've been planning to do to me. I want to know how many other people you've killed, and I want to know why you targeted my son." Rebecca laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. "Your precious Thomas isn't the target, you stupid old woman. He's just collateral damage. You're worth $3.7 million, and I've spent 2 years positioning myself to inherit every penny of it. 2 years. You've been planning this since before you even met Thomas. I researched potential targets for months before I chose you, a single elderly woman with substantial assets and an unmarried son who worked in the financial district. Thomas was so lonely, so desperate for companionship after his divorce. It was almost too easy to make him fall in love with me." The casual cruelty in her voice, the way she spoke about manipulating my son's emotions and loneliness, made my anger flare even hotter, but I forced myself to remain calm. I needed her to keep talking to give me more information I could use against her. "How many others have there been?" I asked. Rebecca smiled, and it was the most chilling expression I'd ever seen. "You'd be number 8. Though technically you'd be the first one I actually had to inject. The others were easier. A little extra medication in their evening pills." A small adjustment to their oxygen levels. A carefully timed fall down the stairs. You've been surprisingly resilient for someone your age. 8 victims. The number hit me like a physical blow, but I couldn't let Rebecca see how deeply her confession had shaken me. I had to keep her talking. Had to get her to reveal more details that could be used as evidence against her. 8 innocent people, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. 8 families who trusted you, who welcomed you into their lives, and you murdered them for money. Rebecca shrugged with terrifying indifference. It's just business, Margaret. These people were going to die anyway. I simply expedited the process and made sure their assets went to someone who could actually use them instead of sitting in some nursing home draining their accounts. And Thomas, what happened to my son when I'm dead and you've stolen everything I worked my entire life to build? For the first time since her mask had dropped, Rebecca's expression softened slightly, but it wasn't with genuine emotion. It was with something that looked almost like pity. Thomas will grieve for a few months, of course, but people recover from loss. He'll move on, and we'll have a very comfortable life together, funded by your generous inheritance. He'll never know what really happened to you. The way she spoke about my son's future grief, as if it were nothing more than a minor inconvenience, made something snap inside me. This woman had spent 2 years manipulating Thomas's loneliness, making him fall in love with her. Also, she could position herself to murder his mother and steal her money. You underestimate how well Thomas knows me, I said. He'll never believe I died peacefully in my sleep, especially not when he finds out about all the financial changes you've been making using my voice. Rebecca's confidence flickered for just a moment. What financial changes? The recordings you made while you thought I was unconscious. The ones where you perfectly imitated my voice authorizing bank transfers and investment changes. Did you really think I would notice when thousands of dollars started disappearing from my accounts? That was another bluff, but it hit its target. Rebecca's face went pale, and I knew I'd guessed correctly about what she'd been doing with those voice recordings. You've been accessing my accounts, I continued, pressing my advantage. Using those recordings to authorize transfers, probably moving my money into accounts you control. How much have you stolen already? It's not stealing, Rebecca said. Defense payment for services rendered. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to take care of someone your age? The patience required, the constant attention, the sacrifice of my own time and energy. Services rendered? You mean poisoning me every night and planning to inject me with whatever's in that syringe? Rebecca glanced down at the syringe still clutched in her hand, seeming to remember she was holding it. This would have been peaceful, Margaret. Much more humane than some of the other methods I've had to use. You would have simply gone to sleep and never woken up. No pain, no struggle, no awareness of what was happening. How generous of you, I said dryly. And I suppose you had some story prepared to explain my sudden death? Complications from your surgery. It happens all the time with people your age. A blood clot, an infection, heart failure brought on by the stress of recovery. Thomas would have been sad, but he wouldn't have questioned it. Neither would the doctors. The clinical way she discussed my planned murder, as if it were nothing more than a business transaction, made my stomach turn. But I forced myself to keep her talking. Every confession she made was another nail in her coffin. What about the other victims? What stories did you tell their families? Rebecca seemed almost proud as she began recounting her previous crimes. Mrs. Chun in San Francisco had a heart attack in her sleep after I'd been caring for her for 6 months. Her family was so grateful for all the support I'd provided during her final days. Mr. Rodriguez in Phoenix fell down his basement stairs after taking too many pain medications. Tragic accident, everyone said. Mrs. Foster in Denver had a stroke while I was out running errands. I came home to find her collapsed on the kitchen floor. And you inherited from all of them? Not directly, of course. That would have been too suspicious. But I'd spent months building relationships with their children, their relatives, their caregivers. People trust you when you're the one who's been taking care of their elderly family members. They're grateful, and grateful people are generous people. You manipulated grieving families into giving you money. I provided comfort and support during their darkest hours. If they chose to show their appreciation financially, Who was I to refuse? The rationalization in her voice was nauseating. Rebecca had convinced herself that she was some kind of benevolent caregiver rather than a calculating serial killer who preyed on vulnerable elderly people and their families. "And my son," I asked, "after I'm dead and you've stolen my money, what happens to Thomas when he's no longer useful to you?" Rebecca's smile returned cold and predatory. "Thomas is different from the others. He's younger, healthier, and he has his own career and assets. I might actually stay married to him for a while. Having a stable, respectable husband provides excellent cover for my work." "Your work? You mean murdering elderly people?" "I mean providing estate transition services to families in need. There's quite a demand for what I do, Margaret. More lonely, wealthy elderly people than you might imagine, and children who are too busy with their own lives to properly care for their aging parents." The way she described her murder business, as if it were a legitimate service industry, made my skin crawl, but it also gave me insight into how she'd been operating. Rebecca wasn't just a random killer. She was running what amounted to a murder-for-hire scheme, targeting elderly victims whose families would be grateful for her help and unlikely to ask too many questions. "How did you find your victims? How did you know about their financial situations?" "Research, Margaret. Lots and lots of research. Public records, obituaries, real estate transactions, investment portfolios. Amazing what you can learn about someone if you know where to look. Then it's just a matter of finding the right way to insert yourself into their lives." And Thomas was my weak point. Thomas was your son, lonely and vulnerable after his divorce, working in finance, where he'd mentioned his wealthy mother to his colleagues. It took me 3 months of careful positioning to arrange our first meeting at that coffee shop near his office. I made sure I was reading a book about financial planning, wearing clothes that suggested I was professional but approachable, sitting where he couldn't help but notice me. The calculation behind her manipulation of Thomas's loneliness made me want to grab that syringe from her hand and use it on her instead. She'd studied my son like a predator studies prey, learning his weaknesses and exploiting them with surgical precision. "He fell in love with you. He fell in love with who I pretended to be. The caring, intelligent woman who was fascinated by his work, impressed by his success, and eager to meet his family, especially his elderly mother who might need some assistance as she aged. You targeted me before you even met me. I knew everything about you before I ever spoke to Thomas. Your age, your health status, your financial situation, your living arrangements, your relationship with your son. I knew you'd had hip problems for years and would likely need surgery soon. I knew you were too independent to agree to assisted living, but too proud to burden Thomas with your care. All I had to do was position myself as the perfect daughter-in-law, eager to help take care of the mother of the man I loved." The scope of her deception was breathtaking. Rebecca had spent months, maybe even years, researching my family and planning her approach. She'd manipulated every aspect of our relationship from her first meeting with Thomas to her insistence that I recover in their home rather than a rehabilitation facility. The hip surgery was the perfect opportunity. It was ideal timing. You needed care. Thomas was worried about you, and I was the loving wife eager to help. 3 months of recovery time gave me plenty of opportunity to establish the evening tea routine, gain access to your personal information, and begin the asset transfer process. And if I'd recovered faster than expected, Rebecca's expression darkened. I would have found another way. A fall down the stairs, perhaps, or maybe your pain medications would have interacted badly with your other prescriptions. There are so many ways an elderly person can have a fatal accident during recovery. The casual way she discussed alternative methods for murdering me sent ice through my veins. But it also revealed something important. Rebecca was adaptable, experienced, and completely ruthless. She'd planned for multiple scenarios, which meant she'd probably planned for the possibility of being discovered as well. "What's your escape plan?" I asked. "Escape plan?" Rebecca looked genuinely confused. "Why would I need an escape plan? You're going to die tonight, Margaret." The confused ramblings of a dying old woman aren't going to convince anyone of anything. Even if I die tonight, the evidence will still exist. The photographs, the recordings, the research I've done on your previous victims. What evidence? You've been drugged unconscious every night for months. You couldn't have collected any evidence. I haven't been unconscious every night. Tonight isn't the first time I've pretended to drink your poison tea. Rebecca, I've been watching you, documenting everything you do, gathering proof of what you really are. That was partially true. Tonight was indeed the first time I'd avoided drinking the tea completely, but I had been growing suspicious for weeks and paying closer attention to small details that seemed off. You're lying, Rebecca said. But I could hear uncertainty creeping into her voice. Am I? Would you like me to describe exactly how you photographed my driver's license last Tuesday night? Or how about the way you practiced imitating my voice while standing over my supposedly unconscious body? I can tell you word for word what you said in that recording. Rebecca's hand tightened on the syringe, and I saw desperation beginning to replace her earlier confidence. It doesn't matter what you think you saw or heard. Dead people can't testify, but living people can. And I'm very much alive, Rebecca. More importantly, I'm not the helpless old woman you thought you were dealing with. What do you mean? I reached into my nightstand drawer, moving slowly so as not to provoke her into doing something rash. I mean, I've spent the last 2 weeks preparing for this moment. My fingers closed around the small digital recorder I'd hidden in the drawer 3 days earlier when my suspicions had finally crystallized into certainty. It had been recording our entire conversation. You've been confessing to 8 murders, Rebecca. Describing in detail how you've been poisoning me, stealing my money, and planning to kill me tonight. Every word you've said has been recorded. Rebecca stared at the device in my hand, her face cycling through disbelief, rage, and finally panic. You can't prove any of this. It's your word against mine. Actually, it's your word against you. Your own confession recorded in your own voice describing crimes that can be verified through police investigation. Detective Morrison is going to be very interested in hearing this recording. Detective Morrison doesn't exist, Rebecca said desperately. You're bluffing about calling the police. You're right, I admitted. I haven't called Detective Morrison yet, but I will be calling him first thing in the morning along with the FBI, the district attorney's office, and every news outlet in the city. Your murder spree ends tonight, Rebecca. No, Rebecca said, raising the syringe. It ends with you. She lunged toward me, but I was ready for her. 3 months of physical therapy had strengthened my legs considerably, and years of dealing with aggressive clients in my accounting practice had taught me a thing or two about handling dangerous people. I rolled away from her attack, hitting the floor on the far side of my bed with more agility than someone my age should have possessed. The recorder went flying across the room, but that didn't matter. I had backup recordings hidden in 3 different locations. Thomas, I screamed at the top of my lungs. Thomas, help me. Rebecca scrambled around the bed after me, still clutching the syringe. He can't hear you. I gave him sleeping pills and his dinner. He won't wake up until morning. That revelation hit me like a physical blow. Rebecca had been drugging Thomas, too, keeping him unconscious while she went about her murderous business. My poor son had no idea he'd been living with a serial killer who was systematically destroying his family. But if Thomas couldn't help me, I'd have to help myself. I grabbed the lamp from my nightstand and swung it toward Rebecca as she came around the bed. The heavy ceramic base connected with her wrist, and she screamed, dropping the syringe. It hit the aged wood floor, its deadly contents spreading against the horror reflected in the moonlight streaming through my window. A clear puddle, that you crazy old witch, Rebecca snarled, cradling her injured wrist. Do you have any idea what you've just done? I've saved my own life, I replied, keeping the lamp raised between us. And probably saved the lives of future victims you haven't gotten to yet. Rebecca's eyes darted around the room, looking for another weapon or an escape route. But I'd thought this through carefully. The bedroom door was behind me, blocking her exit. The windows were on the 2nd floor, with no easy way down. She was trapped, and we both knew it. This isn't over, Margaret, she said, backing toward the far corner of the room. Even if you turn me in, even if they arrest me, you'll never feel safe again. There are others like me out there, others who know about you now. Others like you. Rebecca's laugh was bitter and sharp. You think I work alone? You think this is some amateur operation run by one person? I'm part of something much bigger than your limited imagination could comprehend. The implications of what she was saying hit me like ice water. Rebecca wasn't just a lone serial killer. She was part of some kind of organized network that targeted elderly people across the country. "How many of you are there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Enough," Rebecca said cryptically. "We share information, resources, techniques. When one of us identifies a particularly valuable target, we collaborate to ensure success. Your case file has been circulating for months, Margaret. Everyone knows about the wealthy widow in Michigan with the lonely son in Portland." My blood ran cold. Other predators knew about me, knew about Thomas, knew about our family situation. Even if I stopped Rebecca tonight, there could be others waiting to take her place. "You're lying," I said. But my voice betrayed my uncertainty. "Am I? How do you think I knew so much about your financial situation before I ever met Thomas? How do you think I had such detailed information about your health problems, your living arrangements, your relationship with your son? We have people everywhere, Margaret. Banks, hospitals, law enforcement, government agencies. Information flows both ways." I realized she might have more syringes in there, more ways to hurt me if she could reach her supplies. "Stay away from that bag," I warned, raising the lamp higher. "Or what? You'll hit me again? Face it, Margaret. You're 68 years old with a recently replaced hip. How long do you think you can keep this up? How long before your strength gives out and I get my hands on another syringe?" She was right about my physical limitations, but she was wrong about my resolve. I'd spent 3 months being victimized, drugged, and manipulated by this woman. I discovered she was planning to murder me and steal everything I'd worked my entire life to build. There was no way I was giving up now. "Long enough," I said firmly. "Long enough for the police to arrive." "What police? You admitted you haven't called anyone yet." I smiled, and I could see the expression unsettled her. "I haven't called anyone yet because I didn't need to. I called them 3 hours ago." That wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. What I had done was set up an insurance policy that Rebecca couldn't have anticipated. "You see, Rebecca, I may be 68 years old, but I'm not stupid. When I realized what you were planning to do to me, I made arrangements. If I don't make a specific phone call by 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, a very detailed package gets delivered to the police, the FBI, and the media. Letters explaining everything I've discovered about you, copies of all my research, recordings of your midnight activities, and instructions for investigating your previous victims." Rebecca's face went pale. "You're bluffing. You've been drugged unconscious every night. Have I? Or have I been letting you think I was unconscious while I gathered evidence against you? How do you think I knew about your voice recording sessions? How do you think I knew about you going through my personal documents?" I could see doubt creeping into Rebecca's expression. She was beginning to realize that her perfect plan might not have been as perfect as she'd believed. "Even if that's true," she said, "it doesn't matter now. If you die tonight, your insurance policy dies with you. Actually, it doesn't. The beauty of modern technology, Rebecca, is that you can schedule things in advance. Emails, text messages, even phone calls. If I don't cancel the automated messages I've set up, everything I know about you goes public, whether I'm alive or dead." That was a complete bluff. But Rebecca didn't know that. I could see her mind racing, trying to calculate whether I was telling the truth and what her options were if I wasn't lying. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "I want you to sit down on that chair and tell me everything. Every victim, every accomplice, every detail of your operation. I want names, dates, locations, methods, everything. And then what? You turn me in anyway. Maybe. Or maybe we make a deal. Maybe I'm more interested in stopping future murders than punishing past ones. Maybe I'm willing to let you disappear quietly if you provide information that can save other potential victims." I wasn't sure if I meant that or not. Part of me wanted to see Rebecca pay for what she'd done to those 8 innocent people and what she'd planned to do to me, but another part of me recognized that getting information about her network might be more valuable than getting revenge against one person. "You want me to betray my associates? I want you to stop being a murderer. How you accomplish that is up to you." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, studying my face, trying to read whether I was serious about potentially letting her go. I kept my expression neutral, giving her nothing to work with. There are 12 of us, she said finally. 12 active operators working across the United States. We target elderly individuals with significant assets and minimal family support. The network has been operating for 8 years. How do you find your targets? Data, mining mostly. Public records, obituaries, real estate transactions, medical records, social media posts from family members. We look for patterns that indicate vulnerability and opportunity. Medical records. How do you access those? We have people inside healthcare systems, nurses, administrators, even some doctors. They identify potential targets and provide us with detailed health information that helps us plan our approaches. The scope of the conspiracy Rebecca was describing was staggering. This wasn't just a few criminals working independently. It was an organized network with connections throughout multiple industries and government agencies. Who runs the operation? I don't know his real name. We call him the coordinator. He manages assignments, provides resources, and handles the financial aspects of our work. None of us have ever met him face to face. How do you communicate with him? Encrypted messages through a secure platform. Dead drops for physical materials when necessary. The whole system is designed so that if one of us gets caught, we can't compromise the others. But you're compromising them now. Rebecca shrugged. You've put me in an impossible position, Margaret. If I don't cooperate with you, I go to prison for the rest of my life. If I do cooperate, maybe I have a chance to disappear and start over somewhere else. What about the other potential victims? How many elderly people are currently being targeted by your network? I don't know exact numbers. Each operator typically works on 2 or 3 cases simultaneously. Some cases take months or even years to develop properly. So, there could be 20 or 30 people right now who are being drugged and manipulated by your associates, having no idea they're being prepared for murder. Probably more than that. The coordinator is always expanding the operation, recruiting new operators, and identifying new target demographics. That was 5 years ago. Rebecca is serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. The FBI task force that investigated her network managed to arrest 9 of the 12 operators she told me about. 23 elderly people who are being targeted are now safe, and countless future victims will never know how close they came to losing everything. Thomas still struggles with the guilt of bringing a monster into our family, but he's healing. I'm stronger than ever, and I make sure every elderly person I meet knows that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who offer to help.